Okay, so welcome back everyone. Got a great afternoon ahead of us, of course, and we're going to kick it off by hearing again from Andrew Budd. Andrew's launched his own, he was very forward-thinking and launched his own company dedicated to facial authentication and has had great success with it, not least due to COVID, which is sad, but quite positive from his commercial point of view. And so he knows a lot, probably more than anyone else, about biometrics and authentication. So he's going to talk about that, and then we're going to have a quick chat on stage. So, Andrew.
Thank you very much. I always enjoy the session immediately after lunchtime because I'm in a fierce struggle with the post-lunch insulin crash, I know I'm succeeding if people don't fall asleep while I'm speaking. Thank you for that introduction, Tim. Just a few words about iProov. We've been going about 10 years. We're the world leaders in assuring genuine presence and facial verification for the purposes of ID verification and authentication. We're based in Waterloo here in London. We're about 150 people. We work all across the world, and a couple of weeks ago we did over 1 million verifications in a day. So that gives you a sense of scale and positioning. The first thing I just want to start by talking about is I want to re-emphasize what I said this morning, which is that it's really important in understanding the fabric and functioning of this market to distinguish between the issue of digital identity and the issue of authentication. Authentication, this is the process of binding real human beings, that is, the entities that ultimately people trust. Trust resides with people, not with dossiers of information. It's the process of binding those trusted people to their dossiers of information, and it doesn't necessarily involve identification itself. So, for example, we as iProov never know who the person we are authenticating actually is. Identity can stay with the digital identity provider or issuer. The authentication process is about ensuring that the real human being is the same person depicted in a trusted photo or entity. And that's really it. So there is a lot of confusion in this market between identity and authentication, and it's important to avoid that. The session is about delivering biometrics, and the first and key topic that one needs to address is whether biometrics are delivered on the device or from the cloud. And again, there's a significant confusion. In reality, these two models are completely different. When we talk about device-based identity, we're all, I think, familiar with Face ID and its Android equivalents. We're now seeing the evolution of FIDO, which is the international standard for device-based biometrics. It has huge advantages. I mean, we all know its convenience. It's clearly free. It's free for the user to use, and it's free for the service providers to rely on, and everybody just kind of knows it. So it's an established behavior. Cloud-based technology in which the biometric authentication takes place in the cloud and not on the device is a completely different beast with different characteristics that make it more appropriate in some circumstances. It is, of course, equally convenient, the user experience that is one of the main drivers of biometrics, but it's also durable, which means that when, as my son did, you drop your phone into the toilet and it ceases to work, your authentication credentials don't vanish in a splash of dirty water. Similarly, when your device is lost, stolen, etc., your key credentials remain in the cloud. They don't get lost with the hardware. And from an inclusion point of view, there are huge advantages as well, because if it's done right, it is completely device and platform independent. So we provide the same services to the high-end iPhone owners as we do to the users of $20 Android One phones in Africa and elsewhere. That kind of inclusion is really important because in many applications, being able to deliver services to people aged 9 to 90, whatever their economic circumstances, whatever their level of technological facility, whatever access to technology is very important. And therefore, if an identity credential is stored in the cloud, then potentially people, as has happened, people can authenticate using their friends' or family's devices or even an internet cafe's device. For reasons that I'll describe in a minute, cloud-based biometrics are far more far more secure and resilient. There is very little comparison. And the great thing is that cloud, as opposed to device-based, it's very easy to tie to photo ID technology, to photo IDs, because the photo IDs are obviously always uploaded to the cloud for various reasons. The comparison is very difficult to do on the device, a challenge that FIDO is currently coming to grips with under our co-chairmanship at the moment. There are really three moments when biometrics are to be used, and I'll take you through each of these three individually. ID proofing at onboarding, control of ongoing access management, and the recovery of identities. Let's talk about them briefly. Onboarding with face verification is absolutely, it's unavoidable because, as I said this morning, the photograph is the one thing on government-issued ID that ties that ID to the bearer. It's as simple as that. And if you do it properly, you protect by assuring the genuine presence of the user, you prevent the use of stolen or synthetic credentials. So I can't lift Dario's driving license and use it myself if I don't look like Dario, and I can't, as many people do, create a synthetic identity using thispersonnneverlived.com photographs and present myself because this person is not a real person. So it's an incredible defense and deterrent against them. And what it does, I invented this phrase initially as a joke, but it seems to be getting some degree of traction. What it does is it asserts the centrality of the couch. Pre-COVID, a lot of identity proofing processes involved branches, offices, in-person presentations. All that went. And suddenly, onboarding had to be done at home on the couch, in an unsurveyed environment, using untrusted networks, using untrusted devices, and certainly the people were untrusted because they were unsurveyed. So things that happen on the couch stay on the couch, and it's really important to ensure, therefore, that you have a high degree of integrity in that process, and good, strong cloud face verification can do that. The second is obviously authentication for access management. As we heard this morning, the definition of strong authentication is 2 or more factors. Many organizations, many means exist for doing a device-based factor. So there can be PKI solutions, certificates held on in the trusted execution environment, IMSI lookups, the kinds of things that we were hearing this morning. Good old SMS OTP is basically a device possession factor, but you need a second factor. And it's important that second factor should be independent from the first factor. Cloud-based biometrics are an extremely good way of doing that. The beauty of face is that you can actually enroll it directly against a photo ID. The challenge which we faced, I mean, we launched palm biometrics back in 2019, and the question was always, how do I know that this palm belongs to the person depicted in the photo ID? I see their face, I see their palm, but how do I know that they're the same person? And the enrollment of other biometrics is a challenge. It's not insuperable. It's one that the industry is grappling with, but it's what makes any other biometric other than face just hard. And finally, identity recovery. The dirty little secret is that it doesn't matter how strong you make device-based, device-dependent authentication. There's always a point at which the device falls in the toilet, see above, gets upgraded, lost, stolen, broken, whatever, at which point the device factor has gone. And that is the key point. That is a key point of weakness. That is the point at which attackers have always attempted a device takeover. I commend to you an article written in Wired magazine by Matt Honan in August 2012, in which he describes exactly what happened to his life when the device recovery, when the account recovery process for Apple was cracked by fraudsters, and it totally devastated his life for about 12 months afterwards. So there is a moment of key single-factor vulnerability and strong face. You need strong, because you've got to protect the user, and it's got to be device independent because the device is sitting at the bottom of the toilet. So that is so identity recovery is one of the hardest problems across the authentication world. It's hard in self-sovereign identity and verifiable credentials. It's hard in multi-factor authentication. And cloud-based face verification is actually one of the only ways of solving it. What are the threats that one is attempting to deal with? There are really 3 things that have to be done to assure the genuine presence of the user. Firstly, you have to make sure that it's not the wrong person, that you're not subject to an impersonation attack, that somebody doesn't present themselves as another person. And frankly, that is by far the easiest of the tasks. Face matching technology 6 or 7 years ago was a huge technological challenge. Now it's a done deal. It's solved. Over 300 companies produce outstanding results when they submit themselves to the NIST FRVT tests. So it's a done problem. The problems of ethnic bias, if they exist, are orders of magnitude below what would affect face verification. Face matching, in order to assure that it's the right person, is a solved problem. And then you've got to assure that it's a real person and not an artifact, a photograph or a video on an iPad, or as in this case, a 3D mask like this, which my wife absolutely refuses to have in the house. An object, an artifact put in front of the screen, is it real? Is it a real person? And this is what's conventionally known as liveness. And that has for a while been the source of a lot of testing, a lot of fun and so on, but in reality, the world has moved on. It's not a particularly scalable attack. The really dangerous attacks are digital injection attacks. That's where somebody either socially engineers to steal a video of somebody, or they simply create a deep fake. They deep fake a never existed person, and they animate it, and it moves its heads and nods and talks and does everything else you would do, and they inject it straight into the data stream without it ever passing through the cameras or the sensors, meaning that it has none of the cues associated with an artifact attack. And you can do that at the scales of tens or hundreds of thousands of people, and attackers do so. Only if you can assure not only is it a right person, not only is it a real person, but they're right here, right now, do you have genuine presence. And the combination of liveness and digital injection protection are really hard problems. They are amongst the hardest problems, not just for face, but for all biometrics that exist. But as long as they can be solved to an adequate level of security, they mean that the question of whether my face could be stolen or not never arises. You heard me say this morning, and I'll repeat this gruesome analogy again just now, you cannot steal a person's face without a scalpel and a lot of blood. You cannot steal a person's face. You can copy it. And genuine presence assurance is all about ensuring that you can detect copies reliably. And if you can, the face becomes a really super identity credential, authentication credential. However, we always have to remember that it is a form of cyber defense. No form of cyber defense is invulnerable. This is not cryptography. This is a cyber system. And all cyber systems of whatever sort have exploits. An exploit means a weakness, something that can be exploited to break in. And it's inevitable. All systems have exploits, and threats evolve. So in the world of cyber, the world of cyber is divided into those who know that they've got a vulnerability, and those who don't know. And what's really important in this world is that in delivering biometric genuine presence assurance and verification, that the means are in place to ensure that vulnerabilities can be detected and fixed. And one of the problems of device-based biometrics is that they are completely deprived of any monitoring mechanism that will ever detect any successful attacks, how those attacks were undertaken, and will provide any guidance as to how those attacks should be fixed. And that is a crucial security weakness of all device-based or on-premises or unmonitored liveness systems. Finally, we have to remember that actually what we're trying to do is to deliver trust and assurance for the user. That this has to be not frictionless. I don't like frictionless. The last time I had a frictionless experience was when my car skidded on ice and smashed into a lamppost. What we need to do is instead to make it effortless. To make it, if we're interested in inclusion and we're interested in transaction success, the trick is to make it effortless, which is not the same as invisible. There are key metrics which everybody should always ask themselves when looking at any biometric system. What are the success rates for good people? A nasty secret in this industry is that in a lot of cases, success rates are in the 80 to 85% rate. It's not good enough. Anything below 95% will turn the users off, and we should be aiming for much higher numbers, and indeed, we accomplish much higher numbers than that on large scale. The second metric, which you should always ask for, is the number of attempts that it takes good people to succeed. So if that average number is kind of two or above, yes, it works. Yes, your success rates are high, but you've tortured the customer to make it happen, and that's not good enough. Again, this industry runs on success rates of 1.5 to 1.8, and that's just not good enough. You should always be looking for numbers that are below 1.2. Inclusion is a fundamental requirement to ensure that, that the relying parties and the identity issuers can address the entire market. People aged 9 to 90, whatever their platform, whatever the power of their processor, however much money they were able to spend on their device. Inclusion is not just a commercial advantage, it's actually a social necessity. And finally, you mustn't underestimate the significance of feeling in this whole process. There is an emotional element involved in the process of authentication. So tests and academic studies have shown that if you are allowing people to access things that they recognize have high value, and you make it too fast, and too quick, with insufficient ceremony, it actually frightens them. It makes them uneasy. That when you're doing high-value transactions, people want the reassurance of some ceremony. Last week I was talking to a firm that had actually introduced a spinner into their process, completely artificially, to give people the sense that something was happening. So in some circumstances, a good feeling is about ceremony, the appropriate level of ceremony. In addition, when you're showing, it is a necessity to show people their faces when you're doing face verification. That's a moral requirement as much as anything else. But if you show people their faces, a mirror image of their faces, when they're holding the phone the way most people hold it, what they get is a mirror image of themselves seen from 30 centimeters away, 15 degrees below eye level. What you get is a huge chin, in my case, rather too much nose hair, no ears at all, and funny piggy little eyes. It's horrible. It's horrible. 60% of people suffer selfie anxiety. So one has to solve that in some ways. The way we do it is by abstracting the face so that you can't see how horrible you look. Others insist on mirror images, at which point it turns into a photo session. We have to be sure when we're designing biometric processes that we care about how it makes the user feel. If the user feels good, if they feel in control, if they feel respected, if they feel included, and if they feel safe, then biometric verification can take its place as a factor in assuring the authentic presence of people who are asserting their digital identities, a process that I think will be a human right in future. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you so much. It's always interesting to hear someone who's actually built something and has actually rolled it out and learned a lot of lessons on the way. So the first question I'm going to ask you is a very basic question, and you have kind of covered it there. We had Andy in the last presentation before lunch who's vein detection. Why face, and what do you think about some of these other biometric alternatives?
So we didn't adopt face because we were somehow in love with them. There were three or four basic advantages in face over other biometrics. And let it be said, we have launched, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been offering contactless palm print verification. That is, you hold your hand above a mobile phone or in front of a camera. Very much, in some ways, a similar experience, much faster. The challenge of enrollment is a major point. So the first point is faces have the huge advantage of enrollment, that you can pick a trusted face off an identity document, and immediately you know who you're dealing with. So you don't have this break in the chain of trust. The second reason is that you can authenticate a face using the camera that you'll find on any personal device. So the beauty about faces is that the sensors are absolutely ubiquitous. There are no quality requirements on it. It's not something that you can only do with a high-end phone. So a face is ubiquitously and inclusively accessible. The third is that it's dead easy. It's the easiest thing. You look at your phone, it looks back at you. It could not be a more passive, easier experience. You don't have to explain to people what to do. I was very interested in ear biometrics, for example. The Swiss, by the way, the world experts in ear biometrics, which work jolly well. The only problem is that in order to do it, you have to kind of hold the phone to your ear. This has two problems. One is that you feel like an idiot doing it, and the other is that you have to give people written explanations for doing it. The moment you have to explain to somebody what to do, your conversion rates will go down the toilet. And the fourth is that, frankly, face verification works brilliantly. Face matching technology is now orders of magnitude better than is necessary to verify anybody. And the liveness information, the genuine presence information that you get from a face, is enormously richer than that you get from any other biometric. So you can actually do a genuine presence assurance better on a face than on almost any other biometric. Those are the four concrete reasons why face is so successful.
You talked about liveness detection being one of the two great challenges. And what you're doing there is you're trying to stop people from a photo or a face mask or whatever. How have you solved that problem? I know you have like flashing lights and stuff. How did you come up with that? And maybe you can talk us about some of the other ways that people have tried to solve liveness detection.
So our core technology relies on a proprietary technology, which I have to say I invented about 10 years ago, called the flash mark. What we do is our servers tell the device at the time of authentication to illuminate the device screen with a rapidly changing sequence of colors. That sequence of colors is one time and cannot be predicted by an attacker in control of the device. While the user's face is being illuminated by those colors, we stream a short video back to our servers, about 2.5 seconds, and we analyze the reflection of the light from their face. The way that it reflects off their faces, the spatial and spectral characteristics, tell us that we're looking at a skin-covered, live, human face-shaped 3D object, and the sequence of colors that is so genuinely reflecting has to be correct. If the sequence is wrong, we know that we're looking at a prefabricated deepfake or a recording. So what we've done effectively is to probe a one-time biometric. And this method, which is extremely difficult to make work reliably, has stood up to a US government federal red team attack by 8 contractors for almost 3 months. It's been subject to numerous national security tests. It's been attacked tens of thousands of times a week. It sounds too easy to work, but it turns out to work, and it's very tricky for attackers to address. The great thing is you don't have to do anything. You look at your phone, it looks back at you.
So you have to blink, or
you don't have to. No, it's very important that you don't have to do anything.
Right.
Blinking. There are other methods which involve asking the user to do things. Those have 2 problems. One is that you have to tell people to do things, and as any of us in the mobile industry know, the moment you start telling people to do things, you lose 25% of your users straight off. If there are 2 things you have to do, you lose 50%. So instructions are a bad thing. So you lose good users, but it's actually very easy indeed to make a deepfake blink. So motion-oriented things, blinking, turning your head, speaking numbers, today have the unique characteristic of discriminating in favor of spoofs. The spoofs are more likely to pass than the real people. That's not an ideal solution. There are other methods involving moving the phone in and out. We have a product which uses the motion sensors in a device to do so, and the number of vendors who do that, that's quite good, although it's very vulnerable to digital injection attacks. Digital injection attacks are the big threat, and there are really 2 ways that you can defeat them. One is to try to harden the code, the actual SDK code on the device, and hope that no one breaks it. Good luck with that. The other is to use biometric methods, which is what we do. There is a tendency in the industry to blur these 2, and they mustn't be blurred. Hoping that your software will stand up to the concerted attacks of the North Korean Secret Service, I think, they fund their ballistic missile program by breaking systems like this, I think is an act of excessive optimism.
So how many attempts hacking your system do you face every day, week, month?
We have thousands a day.
Thousands?
We have thousands a day. I think in 1 month, I think we had something like 80,000 attacks.
And what kind of attackers are they, and what are they hoping to achieve? Is it financial gain, sabotage, blackmail? What are their motivations?
Many of this, as I showed this morning, the gains to be made from compromising identity schemes are enormous. In many cases, you make money. So if people could, the California state unemployment benefit system was losing $30 billion until ID.me introduced us, at which point we put a stop to it. That made a bunch of people who were making a shed load of money very angry. In many cases, setting up new bank accounts is a very valuable process, because if you can manage to set up a mule bank account, you can on-ramp and off-ramp laundered money with impunity. So there's a lot of money to be gained from doing that. We see attacks of all sorts. We don't know where they come from, because everyone always because all the real attackers obfuscate their location and use VPNs. So all of the attacks, surprisingly enough, always come from somewhere in the United States, unless they drop their guard for a second, at which point we discover where they are, or they're foolish enough to have some identifiable background. So we have no idea who the attackers are. We can sometimes guess. Right. but they will use every method imaginable, and sometimes they will spend weeks. We had somebody spend 4 months attacking us uninterruptedly last year. They were very pleased indeed when they were able to get a small handful of successful attacks through. Nobody's invulnerable. Anybody who claims they're invulnerable is not telling the truth or ignorant of their own systems. But the point is our security monitoring caught it, and within a few days that particular exploit had been sealed off. So people really try very hard with a variety of technical, people stick things on their faces, they use entertaining looking masks, which they're not Mission Impossible masks, they're a bit cheaper than that. But massive use of digitally injected synthetic imagery. Nowadays we're at the stage where without machine learning analysis tools, the human eye cannot tell that it's a forgery. The human eye cannot tell that it's a forgery. So sometimes people say, well, do you back your system up, do you back your biometric system up with human testers? And we go, the only purpose of that would be to measure the performance of the human testers. Just to give you a sense, a few years ago, the University of South Australia did a laboratory trial on the performance of passport officers to see how good they were at checking people against their passports. They found that in the case of remote imagery, they made mistakes 10% of the time. They accepted bad people 10% of the time. Any kind of biometric verification systems, not just ours, will be 3 or 4 orders of magnitude better than that. So if you introduce human testers, in these liveness situations where the human eye cannot tell the difference, all that'll happen is you'll introduce noise into the system.
So to get a sense of the before and after, the US agency, which agency was it again?
The IRS.
IRS, that you saved.
California Unemployment Benefit.
Right. What were they doing before, and before they used your system?
In phase one, I'm not quite sure they were doing anything. In phase two, they were using what I would describe as background data checks. So they were getting people to fill in their details and doing background checks and data triangulation and using network-based data points to try to determine whether this person was legitimate or not. And it worked some of the time.
Okay.
It worked some of the time. The moment that you demand that somebody presents a genuine biometric face, you are holding somebody accountable for a crime. So in many cases, what people were trying to do was not to impersonate somebody else, but they were trying to obscure their own face. So one popular technique, for example, was that people would put on a mask, take a photograph of themselves, stick that photograph onto their driving license, and then and then take an image of the driving license, and then try to authenticate themselves wearing that mask, so that they could obscure their own identity. We hold people accountable. This is an unhideable, unshareable, almost unspoofable biometric, which holds the bearer accountable. It creates what I call the Clint Eastwood moment. When the attacker wants to try and defraud a system, he has to decide whether he feels lucky, punk.
Okay, and the scenario you just described as someone putting on a mask, changing their driving license, that worked, did it? Under the previous regime?
Yes.
Yeah.
ID.me has published scores of images of attempts by people like that we caught and that after we were introduced, we caught and blocked, to the considerable disappointment of the attackers.
You're a big advocate, as you explained so eloquently, of the cloud-based verification system. What are the flaws in that system?
It requires a network connection. So if you're offline, it doesn't work. Unless it's properly explained, it can irrationally frighten people. People say, oh, my face is in the cloud. Kalia said it this morning, I'm worried that somebody could steal it. Well, actually, Kalia, I don't need to steal. I'll just go to your LinkedIn profile. Your face is there, I think. So, it really, or I can take a snap of you here. So there is a fear, which I understand, that people's faces can be stolen and abused. My point is that if there are good mechanisms to assure the genuine presence of a person, then a photograph or an image of the person is completely useless. In addition, what we're storing typically are biometric templates, which are extraordinarily difficult to reverse into even the fuzziest image of a person. And a biometric template is effectively worthless. In our case, the biometric templates are stored under anonymous pseudonyms. So in fact, our systems have absolutely no clue as to the genuine identity of the person in the first place. So the drawback is that there is public anxiety about it, but it's not grounded in, shall we say, true privacy threats. It takes a little bit longer. Our fastest solution takes about second and a half, whereas obviously Face ID and Touch ID can take only a second. So there is a very small advantage in terms, and it's free. What we do is not free.
And you also touched on inclusion there. What about people who don't have access to digital devices or not savvy about that? I think in the past you've talked about the possibility of having like a printed out barcode. So if you did that, then that barcode would obviously connect you with some kind of system. Would you need a kiosk, or how would it work?
So one of the huge advantages of cloud-based biometrics as opposed to device-based biometrics is precisely that it can work on any device without compromising the privacy of the person or the ability of the person to assert their identity. The first example of this actually was something called the EU Settled Status Programme. After Brexit, the UK Home Office found itself with an unknown number, but probably over 5 million European citizens who were living completely legally in the United Kingdom in a completely undocumented manner. And because of Brexit, they were going to have to apply for and be granted permanent residence. And they were going to have to do this in sort of 2 years. This was a visa and immigration program of a scale and a velocity that was beyond anything that had ever been tried anywhere else worldwide. And to their credit, the Home Office made a really radical step forward and created an onboarding app and a back-end system that enabled people to apply for settled status and receive it sometimes within 90 seconds. It was fantastic. It was subject to extraordinary criticism when it first came out. That criticism then died away when people just found that it worked brilliantly. And it's been one of the great, huge successes of successful information technology projects run by the British government. At the beginning, because Apple blocked write access to the NFC reader in the device, which was important in order to be able to read the biometric chip in people's passports, this was only accessible on Android phones, which gave rise to immense and completely unfounded criticism of the Home Office. The result was that anybody who didn't have an Android phone or had the misfortune to have an Apple phone needed to use some other device to do this. Now, the Home Office made available kiosks in local libraries and so on, but the vast majority of applicants asked a family member or friend to use their Android device in order to onboard. And you know what? It worked spectacularly. So that's a concrete example of how cloud-based biometrics assist inclusion by enabling people to use other people's devices. It could be, we're dealing at the moment with an aid example where the aid recipients would use a merchant's device to authenticate themselves. In Singapore, services are being offered on kiosks, on government kiosks or on ATMs. So there are public facilities which run the same service as people can access from their phones. That's the power of cloud biometrics.
I haven't really thought this one through, so there may be a stupid question to ask, but you're a B2B company and you're having a huge amount of success, working with partners. Is there any mileage in an iProov consumer-facing product?
One of the lessons that I learned from my previous business from mBlocks, of which I was the founder and for a while the CEO, is figure out what you're good at, focus upon being the best in the world at doing that, and then partner with everybody else who does everything else necessary to produce a solution. There are very few people in the world who just want face genuine presence assurance. It's an incredibly crucial component, perhaps even the crucial component in any kind of identity onboarding or authentication solution. But it's a component. And therefore, things that are offered to what consumers and businesses want are actually solutions. We don't do solutions. We do a part of the solution. So if we're going to be a part of a solution, that's what we're going to stick to. Other people will produce consumer-facing apps. Other people will produce consumer-facing identity solutions, and we will be a loyal and supportive partner to them. But if we were ever to blunder into their business heedlessly, we would both destroy their trust in us, and probably do a fairly bad job. One of the lessons in business is that other people's businesses always look so much simpler than your own.
Okay. All right, well, I think we've got about 10 minutes, so there must be some questions from the floor for this. And if not, what about Dario? Have you got any online? No?
It's that after lunch. It's that after lunch period. Everyone is asleep.
Okay, we've got a question over here.
Please announce your name.
Question from the deep. A question from the deep fake.
I'm a deep fake. So, question, Andrew. The business is doing well and growing in that B2B space. I know you've done some stuff in Australia. So, where are you seeing the biggest growth coming from in terms of need for the services that you're offering?
We're seeing tremendous growth in government users, actually. That's what's really interesting, that the largest consumers of high caliber, large scale identity verification are governments, like governments directly or indirectly, like the IRS in the United States, like the NHS here in the UK, like the government of Singapore, like the government of Australia. There's another government we're working with now. Because when they decide to do things, and the pandemic accelerated the rate at which they had to do this, they move on a very large scale. They move on quickly and, oddly enough, on a large scale. A lot of the identity verification business has been driven over the last 2 years by the crypto business, because crypto has been such an incredible boom, and the money laundering opportunities for crypto were so legion. As regulators began to clamp down on it, and that combined with the enthusiasm, so there's been a huge wave of demand coming from crypto. But it's really, banking and finance continue to be major drivers in this area as well, because of course the centrality of the couch meant that a lot of processes that used to be done in branches or in back offices now had to be done in an automated way.
Question from the gentleman at the back there.
Niklas Bergvall, HTC. So when you are deploying these solutions, you said that nothing works in isolations and they're part of a solution. What are the identity verification processes that you are, let's say, superseding, as well as what technologies are sitting alongside the facial recognition?
So I can answer that. With one example. eIDAS qualified trust services under Article 24 require the issuance of a qualified trust signature, which is the highest sort of signature that can be done under eIDAS. Electronic signature can be done under eIDAS. Has to be done by a physical presence, the physical verification of the person, or some method which is equivalent to the physical presence of a person. So there, in the old days, people used to literally turn up at a branch office or a bank office and present themselves with they'd pull out their passport and show it to a teller, and the teller would squint at them, and they would type things in, and they would type in the details from the passport, and they would look at them, and they would type in the fact that as a teller they had seen the person. And this could be done in Norway. I think the post offices used to charge 30 euros for such a thing. So it was an in-person check. We are now the first biometric authentication system in the world that has been fully certified under the eIDAS regulations and Article 24 to be equivalent to the in-person presentation of a person. So the answer is that's the sort of process we're substituting. Now, one of the principal technologies that we sit beside is the contactless reading of a passport. Pretty much most passports in the world, all passports in Europe, many driving licenses in Europe, and an increasing number of identity cards in Europe have ICAO 9303 standard chips inside them, which include all the details of the identity document and a photograph, and it's all signed by a digital certificate. So it is highly secure. That information can be read by the NFC reader in all phones now. So we partner very many times with a Dutch company called ReadID, who are the world experts in contactlessly reading documents. They too are qualified trust service providers. So the combination of ReadID, very strong verification of a biometric identity document, plus iProov, very strong authentication of the face, matched together produces a process which, at least under the very demanding eIDAS regulations, are literally equivalent to a person turning up in an office. I'll give you one other example. Our first big customer was Rabobank in 2018. They had a problem, which was that they had a lot of teenagers who'd been signed up for bank accounts by their parents, and then became young adults, and they didn't have any KYC documents because their KYC documents related to the adults. Previously, Rabobank had asked them to go through what I would describe as a traditional KYC process, at which something like 70% of them kind of went, let me think, that'll be a no. So they had tremendous churn amongst those processes typically meant assembling a pack of information and putting them in the mail or going down to the bank branch to have them checked. So we, together with ReadID, we created an app which Rabobank distributed. Suddenly, all of their young adults could complete their KYC certifications in 35 seconds. And it had a dramatically positive effect upon the churn rate amongst young adults. One final example is that, so the Dutch bank KNAB, for example, which has about 500,000 customers, they're part of Econ, they had the problem of how to implement strong customer authentication. After PSD2 came along, they had been using PIN pad readers, which cost a fortune and everybody hates. They replaced the PIN pad readers with iProov authentication, and suddenly their customer satisfaction levels rocketed. Finally, Singapore has implemented iProov as an authentication factor on the SingPass now for a couple of years, but as a result of recent phishing scams, the Singapore government has completely lost confidence in SMS OTP as an authentication factor, and so now they've swapped the positions of SMS OTP and iProov in the, facial verification, in the selection list that Singapore citizens can tick off when choosing how to authenticate themselves. So those are 3 examples.
I think one more minute until we finish. So I've got one more quick question for you. You talked about your main customers being governments, and you just mentioned banks there. Do you anticipate a future in which any sort of small business can easily use your system?
So we're very excited about verifiable credentials. The enthusiasm with which I spoke about them this morning was entirely unfeigned. We're working very closely with a number of partners who are world leaders in verifiable credentials, and we see a world in which actually what will happen is that, in fact, user wallets will iProov the owners in order to authenticate to relying parties. So actually, the relying party can easily be an SMB. They're going to be getting their certified credentials from the wallet. Now, what the economic model for that looks like, nobody yet knows, because nobody really understands what the economic model for any part of verified credentials is going to look like. But I think as an industry, we will work it out. We're already working with a number of partners who are providing, on one hand, onboarding solutions. People like Jumio, for example, we're the providers of face verification worldwide for Jumio, who sell to SMBs. And on the other hand, we see a broadening range of companies who are going to provide passwordless capabilities to enterprises of all sorts, including SMEs, and we will be a part of those. We're embedded in the solutions of numerous partners.
Well, it's always fascinating to talk to you, Andrew, so thank you so much for sharing your insights, and thanks very much.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much.